Welcome to Spiritual Cartel's Big Book Main Share. It is with great pleasure to welcome Myers, who's joining us today to share his experience, strength, and hope. Myers, brother, over to you.
Bertie, thank you. So grateful to be here, buddy. Y'all were talking about rain, and I was getting all warm and fuzzy inside. I just we're back in another drought deal here in Texas where I am, and it's some rain would sure be nice. I tell you too, that little introduction with the lightning stuff in there like that, and the music that was playing on that thing, it kind of got me in the feels. I was getting kind of, emotional looking at it. Whoever thought that up, whoever put it together, I'll bring you some little gold stars later and we'll stick them on you. That was pretty special. Really good seeing some folks on here that I haven't seen for a while. My buddy Michael, Cockrell, I love you, buddy. And it's so good to see you. For those that I haven't met, and there's a few on here that I don't think I've met, my name is Myers Raymer. I'm a very grateful, recovered, drunk and dope fiend. Took my last drink and my last trip to the dope house January 15th of 88, same day. And, it was, spent 3 days on the bathroom floor. And, it's amazing what you can find at the bottom of a toilet when you're just sort of sitting there for 3 days. It's just, it's pretty remarkable. It's funny. My twin brother, Chris, had, a jillion, sobriety dates. And when I finally crashed and burned for the last time, I'd never tried to get sober, and I finally had enough, and I, went through some embarrassing stuff, and Chris took me to my very first, AA meeting, January 15th, 88. And, I stayed here. I was the guy that came into the room and fell in love with everybody there and fell in love with the rooms. And in those days, everybody smoked cigarettes, and it, not me, but I always lit one up just so I could be one of the cool kids. And, it was just a lot of fun. I wished it had stayed fun. I do. I wish that it had just kind of stayed on that path and like that. But, after a couple of years, we had another little baby girl, and, things were okay. But I got to a place about 3 years sober where things started getting strange again, and I'm having a hard time figuring out why that is. And it's funny when I tell this piece of this story, I'm not going to get into a bunch of it because I got a lot of other stuff I want to talk about. But but people go, Myers, didn't you recognize that you were getting sick? And I said, yeah, I recognized it, but I didn't know what to do. The only direction that I got from those lovely people that I had met was, just go, maybe you need to go to a meeting every day. And so that's what I started doing. I just started going to a bunch of meetings. The meeting hall where we met was, I could throw a beer can from my bindery where I work. I could throw a beer can and hit that building where that meeting was. It was so close. So it wasn't a problem. But here's the classic situation. A lot of us have found out, some of us the hard way, that you can go to a lot of meetings and still get pretty sick. The meetings treat a lot of things. But sometimes if that's all you're doing, and that was all I was doing, was going to meetings. I had no sponsor. Well, I had one in name only, but, I had never worked the steps. And consequently, I just kept getting goofier and goofier, and stuff started coming out sideways. How many of y'all have ever sponsored somebody or been around somebody that you cared about that got clear of the dope and then drifted over to something else to get addicted to? It could be booze, it could be porn, it could be food, it could be gambling, something's going to scratch that itch of restless, irritable, and discontent. And if it's not the steps in a relationship with God, then y'all just wait, because eventually you'll slide over to something else. I'm eating a half a gallon of Bluebell ice cream every night. I gained 30 pounds after I got sober. It's a big neck and I'm built like a jackrabbit. I'm real skinny and I have this big head and this big neck and it just eating ice cream every night. But it worked. It worked fine for a while. But then I'm getting irritable. And let me ask you, how many of y'all have ever left a meeting feeling like you were a spiritual giant? And by the time you got home, you were wrapped around the axle about something. And now my family doesn't know who's coming home. Who am I? I mean, am I a nice guy or I am the Marquis de Sade? Am I some idiot? And so I remember my wife and I got mad when I got home about something that was absolutely stupid. And I was jumping up and down like a little kid. And my wife looked at me and she's got her arms folded in front of her and she just goes, Myers, really? This is the man I married? And I'm acting like a 3-year-old child. And I knew I was in trouble. I knew it was simply a matter of time. By this time, I'm almost 7 years sober. I've developed this sense of, I'm spending money I don't have to buy things I don't need. I mean, guys, I learned how to fly when I first got sober. And then I had to buy an airplane. And then I had to buy another airplane. And yes, later I had to buy another one. Now, I'm just asking a simple question. How many men need 3 airplanes? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like I know a guy that owns 6 motorcycles. And I'm going, dude, I feel you, but you're an idiot. Quit. You don't need another motorcycle. So I'm doing all of these things. It's manifesting. This stuff is all coming out sideways. I'm buying music I don't listen to. I'm buying tools I don't use. I don't need. I'm buying all of this stuff, clothes I don't wear. Anyhow, one night I ended up at a little grocery store and I'm standing in front of this beer cooler and this lady is standing behind me, irritated as you know what, because I'm standing there taking up her space. And she taps me on the shoulder and she said, sir, are you going to get something or are you going to stand there all night? And I don't know how long I've been standing there, but obviously it was long enough to make her mad. And God love her. I just backed out of that place and I went home and called Chris and told him what had happened. And he said, by now, Chris lives in the hill country where I am now, down in central Texas. And Chris said, I've been telling you for 2 solid years that this was coming, that it was just a matter of time. And I said, Chris, I'm doing everything I'm being asked to do. And he said, I know. And for 2 years, I've been telling you to find another group, and find a group that's got a book study, find a group that will teach you, what the steps look like. Because it's sort of embarrassing that it's 7 years in this. I'm 2 weeks shy of 7 years sober, and I don't even know who the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous are. I just didn't care. I mean, as long as I was sober one day at a time, I was okay. You know, in the words of my buddy Mickey Bush, so's the cat. I mean, sometimes we just get glued to that idea that if we can just stay sober for a long time, we're going to be okay. And some of you will, if you're a little disco drunk or a little, guy, maybe you pull it off. But for most of us, if we're not careful, we'll miss the big picture. There used to be an old saying, we teach what we're taught. And it's really true. Those people that in my original home group were the most delightful people I've ever met in my whole life. They were absolute sweethearts. And I loved them and they loved me, and it was just a big old hug fest every time I was there. But at some point in time, it would have been terrific if we'd had a literature-based meeting so I could have been learning some of the book stuff. I'm a part of 3 different book studies that we're doing, 2 Zoom book studies a week and 1 in person that we just started. And one of those Zoom meetings and then our in-person meetings are at the exact same place in the book. We've just started over into the book. And let me tell you what I absolutely caught off guard with. I just completely, as many times as I've been through the book, I've been studying it like an animal for for decades now. And the thing that catches me off guard is every time we read through that book, there's something else I didn't see before, something else I don't have marked, something else that's so profound. I just look at it and go, Myers, you're an idiot. How did you miss this? And one of the things in this going back through this time that really catches me off guard is, how early in the book, Bill Wilson and then Dr. Silkworth all start saying the same thing. They introduce us to this idea of work and self-sacrifice for others. They introduce us to the idea that we need to develop and move towards a relationship with our Creator. But it's right in your grill. It's right in your face. They're saying it, and yet those of us who never studied it don't see it. We don't understand it. And so we just buy into the, just keep coming back. You'll hear what you need to hear, but all this thing, I get it. I'm not ragging on it. Well, okay. Maybe I'm ragging on it a little bit, but the aphorisms are fun, but sometimes they're confusing. They'll simply, you'll head off into a weird area. And that's me. I'm patting myself on the back every night, going to a meeting, thinking that I'm doing the right thing. And then slowly but surely, I'm beginning to just dissolve and sort of dissipate right in front of my family. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand any more than I do. So Chris, he introduces me to this cat named Cliff Bishop, who passed away years ago. Cliff Bishop was sponsored by Joe McQuaney of Joe and Charlie, so you can kind of already see where this is going like that. I go see Clifford, and he starts asking me questions, and I don't know anything. And I'm trying to be hip, slick, and cool because I came from a big fancy group, and he comes from a little book study in Dallas. And I finally, he just looks at me, and he's just kind of like, I don't know what to do. And he's trying to help me. He's trying to help me see where I am in the big picture. And finally he said, just stop, Myers. Listen, there's not much chance you're going to stay sober. My concern is because you've already mentioned twice in our conversation that you have suicidal tendencies, and I did, that I cannot stop the depression. And he said, one of the biggest, deals that is connected with untreated alcoholism is depression. And you'll see it lots of times in folks. But I'm not connecting all that up. And he said, let me make you a deal. How about you come to our book study for a month or two? And if you don't feel better, you can go back to your original home group. And I thought, okay, that's fair enough. I'll do that. And 28 years later, when I moved from Dallas to Central Texas, I was still a member of that group where we did that book study. There was a guy that Clifford introduced me to. There's a talk that he did, a guy named Don Pritz. I talk about it almost every time I do a talk because it was sort of an epic change for me. Don Pritz had sobered up in the 60s in the federal penitentiary system in Denver, Colorado. And he was a kind of an epic guy. When you saw him, he's just a little short guy, and he's just but listening to him talk, he had some real wisdom there. But in one of his talks that he said, this is Don talking. Don said, I'm concerned these days because we seem to be talking more and more about sobriety and less about recovery. And I remember when I heard it, I remember thinking it's the same stuff. Isn't it the same? And I couldn't have been more off page. It truly is. If any of y'all ever start book studies, if you ever get into a deal where you're studying the text, start marking how many times the word recovered is mentioned in the big book. Over and over and over. It's one of the most reoccurring themes in the book like that. There was a huge difference. I am always going to be a drunk and a dope fiend, but the obsession has been completely removed. I've been to some crazy places in my life, and I've traveled all over the world doing some crazy stuff. But I got to tell you, the obsession has been removed, and that's what recovery looks like. this idea that we paint that being sober one day at a time is enough is problematic, because let me do it. I'm in a geographical area in Texas where there's 4 treatment centers within 20 miles of where I live. So there are literally hundreds of drunks and dope fiends that are getting released, and most of them stay in the area for a while through transitional living and that sort of thing. And so I get a chance to talk to lots of people coming out of treatment. And the one thing that baffles me is that of all of those treatment centers, every one of them in their follow-up, their first question on their follow-up stuff after you've been out for a little bit is, how many meetings are you going to? And I understand the connection. I understand why people want you to do that. But wouldn't it be more effective to ask questions like, how many men are you sponsoring? I think that would be a great one. There's a million things that the book asks us to do. And we seem to just sort of settle into this idea that at the center of our program is a relationship with a meeting. And it never said. Go back and look at the first of the book and notice how many times Bill says, they never put the meeting in the center of our program. I'm not ragging on the meeting, and I'm not saying don't go to meetings. Don't go there, guys. I'm just saying the meeting was never intended to be the center of our program. But they waste no time telling us that a relationship with our Creator is the center of our program. And that the steps, amazing that they are, was designed to get everything out of the way so that I could have that relationship with my Creator. And that, when you look at it from that perspective, the idea of work and self-sacrifice for others, count them. Sometimes in book studies, count how many times they talk about it. It will blow you away. And yet I've sponsored literally hundreds of men who were just like me, burning it down in a meeting, but never ever helping anybody else, never ever carrying a message to somebody else. And this is problematic. It sets a tone of what's out there, and we'll talk about, a little bit. When I met Clifford, and then Clifford introduced me to Joe McQuaney, and Joe would come to Dallas from Arkansas. He would drive down and spend 2 or 3 days with Clifford, and I'd go over and see him, and we'd all sit and have breakfast. And Joe McQuaney was always, if some of y'all, if y'all haven't heard some of Joe McQuaney and Charlie Parmley's old talks, go get some of them. They're amazing. Those book studies that they did in the 70s and 80s were epic. And there was always a lot of pushback. There were people that didn't want to do it. They didn't care about any of that. You know, and I get that. But Joe asked me one night, he said, Myers, let me ask you a question. He said, do you think that you could overcome selfishness by just exerting more self? And I went, absolutely. Of course I can. And I remember him looking at Clifford, then looking back at me, and he goes, you might have to work on that, dude. And then a little bit later, he said, I'm always concerned when I talk to you, Myers, because you have a head full of information that doesn't line up with the text. I know you're well-meaning. I know that you mean well, but it's interesting that here we are almost 10 years into your sobriety. You have not recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. You have not sponsored anybody. And your collection of the big book and the collection of AA is just a collection of aphorisms and one-liners that people have talked about in meetings, and you make that part of your program, and then you just make another piece and another piece. Let me ask y'all to do me a favor. The next time you're sitting in a meeting sometime with that's like an open kind of a discussion-y kind of thing, for just a bit during that meeting, close your eyes and just simply listen to what you're hearing. Remember, these rooms are full of the kindest, nicest people I've ever met. But when you get into discussion hell, when people are just sharing their day, you'll hear so many pieces of conflicting information. Let me give you a great example. One of those episodes where I'm closing my eyes listening, I'm listening to this gal down there named Ann, and Ann is one of my sweethearts in AA. I absolutely love that gal. And she was talking about how her sponsor was having her work the steps 1 month at a time, and perhaps they would be done in a year, but it might take them as much as a year and a half to work the steps. And then 20 minutes later in the same meeting, there's a guy down there who said, well, my sponsor's got me working the steps, on a more timely fashion, and I'm going to be completely done in 40 days. Okay. Now I'm not here to rag on one or the other, but what I want you to understand is, can you see the confusion? If you're just simply sitting in the meeting listening and you're brand new, what's the truth? That's the reason the text gets so important, because the text becomes what's necessary to set the baseline to what's going on. Let me just ask you the question. I think it's important to ask that which opinion lines up more with the basic text? The work it quicker lines up with the text more, for certain it does. And that's why I think that, I've got a big book in front of me, and on page 17, 2/3 of the way down the page, there's a little piece. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element, and the powerful cement which binds us. Listen, when Purdy and I are sitting across from each other, and I'm telling him a bit of story, and he's telling me a bit of story, and all of a sudden we connect, there's nothing cooler than to know that you're finally talking to somebody that totally gets where you're coming from. There's no judgment. There's no nothing. He smiles at me and I smile at him, and we know that we're okay, that we understand each other. But look what Bill Wilson wrote after that. I kind of wish Bill Wilson had shut up right there and didn't write anything else, but he did. The next line, but that in itself would never have joined us together as we are now joined, never held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. Damn. Okay. So if you don't understand the common solution, how do you carry the message? At some point in time, you got to kind of tap that brake a little bit and kind of dig into the idea of learning, what does this addiction look like physically and mentally and spiritually? What is it that in the bigger picture there? Because at some point in time, I tell you a great illustration. Go back and look in the big book. Look at Jim's story and Fred's story in chapter 3. So there's 2 chapters butt to butt right there. There's a solution and more about alcoholism. And in the 3rd chapter, right before We Agnostics, Jim and Fred find him a drunk to work with. Jim and Fred find him somebody to help them. And in both cases, both illustrations, they say, yeah, this is cool, and they back out again and get loaded. And then they call the drunks, the AA guys back into the picture. And in both illustrations, it says the same thing. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. It didn't say we shared our story again. He doesn't need to hear the story again. He doesn't need to hear it. What he needs to hear is there a solution? And that's what the early members of AA were focusing on. How do we get this guy to the solution? Unless we can pull somebody with a vision of what's ahead in the process, we're missing a huge piece of what's going on. How many of you get sickened by how many people come to our fellowships and then leave and don't stay very long? And part of that stuff, I understand addiction. I know what's going on sometimes. But what's important to understand is that sometimes these folks are not hearing what they need to hear. They've heard stories after story after story. And at some point in time, we just need to kind of go, okay, let's start talking about the solution, and let's start talking about what alcoholism is. And I want to paint a picture of what recovery actually looks like. What's downrange? Because without that motivation, why would you stay? Without the motivation of that, eventually you'll crawl back up in your head, and your head will convince you, you know what? this has been a fun experiment, but what I really think is if I can get a better looking girlfriend and a bigger pickup truck, I'm going to be okay. I'll get a better job too while I'm at it. And maybe one more airplane. I'll just buy one more airplane and I'm going to be okay. Y'all see how crazy that is? It's the perfect picture of what insanity actually looks like. This is the reason I love guys like Don Pritz and some of these guys like Clint Hodges out of California. Some of these guys, this is the reason I love them so much, was because they spent a lot of time painting a picture of what it is that they wanted us to move towards. And it was a great motivation to actually be able to see that clearly and then move that direction. I got hung up in a bunch of stuff online the other day, and found this little piece from, Bill W. that Bill Wilson wrote in 1947. It's real short. I just want to read it real quick for you like that. With each passing year, we increasingly realize the immense importance of adequately presenting the program to every new prospect who is in the least inclined to listen. Now, many of us feel this to be our greatest obligation to him, and our failure to do so, our greatest dereliction. The difference between a good approach and a bad one can mean life and death to those who seek our help. So hold your finger on that thought for just a minute. I know this guy that had gotten out of treatment. This was several years ago. He got out of treatment, and we got to be buddies when he was in treatment. And he would send me emails and texts and this kind of stuff. And one night I was driving home from work, and I looked at my text messages, and it's him. And he said, I just left my 39th meeting since I got out of treatment, and still have not heard one mention of God or one mention of the steps. And he was living in Houston, Texas, a huge metropolitan area in Harris County on the coastal part of Texas. 39 meetings he's going to, and he hasn't heard anything about the steps or God. And yet, what's at the center of our program? So what are we talking about? We have to pay attention, y'all, because folks are struggling. It was such a game changer. It was a complete game changer when I finally got to a place where I began to connect dots of what the program was and who these people were and what they intended us to learn. And all of a sudden things got real easy. And guess what? They tricked me into going to a Salvation Army one night and carrying the message. I thought everybody else was going to show up like usual. And those bastards, none of them showed up. They left it to me. And so I got to carry the message to 170 men in a gymnasium at the Salvation Army. And it was the most transformational evening of my entire life, because there was a piece of me, a rather large piece of me, that wanted to walk out the door and say, screw them. They didn't show up. I'm out of here. And then there was another piece that went, if you leave, there's a good chance we'll lose that H&I. We'll lose this opportunity, and the group will suffer. My home group will suffer because we didn't do what we were supposed to do. So I stayed, and God obviously had the hands in that thing, because when we got done with that talk that night, this guy asked me, he said, can you come back tomorrow night? And I got to tell you, y'all ever have emotions that get pulled in two different directions at the same time? She's real purty. I think I need to go talk to her. And at the same time, there's a little voice going, run, Forrest, run, like that. And you're trying to decide which one to listen to, like that. But it's that way, like that. I'm thinking there's a piece of me that went, if I had kept running, if I'd just walked a little faster, I'd have been outside. And I could have milked this night for 10 more years. I went, yeah, I did that talk that night out at the Sally. I could have done that. But what I did was I ended up going back over there. And then I went over again, and then I went over again. And one night I had 4 guys in one night ask me to sponsor them. I'm 10 years sober, never sponsored anybody. And now I've got 4 guys at the Salvation Army that desperately need help. And for whatever reason, they picked me. And it was a life-changing, deal. We need meetings that are like 2 hours long, and maybe I got so much I wanted to talk about. Let me just say this. if you're in a situation in these rooms where you've been sober for a bit of time, but you feel like you're kind of moving sideways instead of forward like that, and we all do. I've never met anybody that doesn't slide sideways a little bit. Pay attention to two primary things. One, how much time are you spending with God? Joe McQuaney was huge on this. This is about God and with time with God and time with God's kids. Dr. Bob nailed it on his little prescription card thing. This is not empty rhetoric. This was based on years and years of watching people drift sideways. And the surest way to get back is to immerse yourself into being of service to somebody else. And that doesn't mean making coffee at a meeting every once in a while. That's not what he was talking about. Well, I go to meetings. That's not what they were talking about, because there was only one meeting a week if you were lucky to have one. They weren't talking about that. They were talking about approaching people. Look at how many times approached is mentioned in the book. They meant for us to walk up to somebody that was struggling, know that they're struggling, and be able to say, what can I do to help? That's work and self-sacrifice. Taking a call at 10 o'clock at night when you really, 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 really don't want to. That's work and self-sacrifice. Joe said, Myers, she said that there'll be a magic time in AA, and I've come to believe that it's a magic little piece for every one of us in our rooms. When we connect up the dots that we're there to feed, not be fed. And the night that it hit me, I was sitting on a floor at a big conference thing that I was at, and I was looking at 500 or 600 people floating around this conference hall. And I remember sitting on the floor and realized that for the very first time, I understood how badly I needed them. I desperately needed them more than they needed me. And once I realized how important that unity was on this stuff, and realized that maybe I could go to a meeting and I could not sit there and talk goofy shit and gossip to people. Maybe I could actually go to a meeting and zero in on people that were struggling, and then go see what I could do to change the course of their life. And guys, it changed everything. There's a place in Dallas called Homeward Bound that's a 3-story concrete building that always smells like urine. I don't know why, but it was always they're bringing these men and women in right in off the street. And I would go out there for years and years and years. I'd go out there on Wednesday night and Friday night. And I want you to understand that, because I want to be sure that you understand I'm telling you the actual truth about how I feel about this stuff. There was never a morning that I woke up and got excited that I was going to have to go to Homeward Bound on Wednesday night. It was an hour and 10-minute drive over there to from where I lived. And I had to drive in rush hour traffic to get over there to carry this message like this. And Friday would be the exact same thing. I'd open my eye early in the morning and go, oh no, it's Friday. I mean, I don't want to do it, but I know that I have to do it because it's imperative. My mental health and everything that goes with it is tied to this. And so I would go up there, climb up those steps to the top, do my H&I and carry a message, try to carry some hope. And then they would let us come out the side door upstairs on a fire escape, and we could walk out. And at that point, you're standing really high up, and I'm looking at the skyline of Dallas with the moon coming up by those buildings like this. And it's always sort of epic looking, and there's fresh air in your lungs for the first time in an hour and 20 minutes. And it's just, this sort of magic. And I would look down in the parking lot, and my homeboys would be down there leaning against your truck, listening to music. And I'm thinking, golly, I go downstairs and we visit for a little while and laugh real hard for a while. And then I get to crawl in my truck, turn in some old Marvin Gaye, and drive all the way back home again. But it's like magic coming home. My wife told me one time, she said, Myers, she said, I don't know what you do at Homeward Bound, but don't ever stop, because you're a completely different guy when you come home. And I remember looking at her, it just, it's funny. You'll play these games up. I'm not helping anybody. It's not that big a deal. It's not that. I mean, our head is the worst place we can be. But when people that you love start telling you things like that, you begin to believe them and realize, wait a minute, maybe my life is transformed by what it is that I'm doing. It's a big deal like that. I got 4 minutes actually. I want to tell you a quick story. Some of y'all will think this is the stupidest story you ever heard, but it really, it might be. Some guys asked me to do a talk at a fancy group in Dallas for an anniversary deal, and I went over there, and it was raining really hard. And when I got over there, I'm underneath this big awning, and there's a bunch of people out there in a butt hut smoking. And I got up on the thing, and I've got a suit, a coat and tie on, and my briefcase, and I'm shaking water off my coat like this, and I'm just standing there, and nobody says anything. And I thought, this is odd. And I remember turning around, and I looked at this guy that was sitting there smoking, and I said, hey, is this a such and such a group? And he goes, yep. And I go, oh, okay. I just turned back around and looking at the parking lot. Nobody said anything to me. Nobody's, hey, are you the speaker tonight? Welcome. No, I mean, that you would expect, but nobody says anything. So I stood out there for 10 minutes. Nobody said anything. So I walked back in, and I can't get through the door because I can't see the latch to get through this big glass panes, and I can't get it. And I said, guys, I can't find the door. And this same guy pointed back over his shoulder like that, just pointed like that. And I remember looking behind him, and there was a little bitty latch about as big as a cigarette lighter on that thing. And I went, okay, thanks for your help, I guess. And I opened the door, went inside, and sat by myself for 10 minutes. And eventually a couple of guys that I sponsor for my home group in Dallas came in, and we visited, and eventually some other people came around, and I did the talk. That was the night I codified the word spankathon, because all I wanted to do was spank everybody that was in the room, because of the deal. 3 weeks later, I was at a place in Fort Worth called the Saginaw Group. I'll tell you the name of this group. As I pull into the parking lot, they have a butt hut out behind their building like that, a little pergola thing, and everybody's back there smoking. And I just pulled in, noticed it, and then pulled into the parking place. And when I got out, I was standing next to my truck fixing my tie before I walked in like this, and somebody touched me on the side, and I jumped and kind of looked around like that. And there were 13 people standing there right next to me in that parking lot. And every one of those people hugged me, and they put their arms around me, walked me inside, and introduced me to everybody that was in that room they introduced me to. And guys, it felt like AA heaven. It felt like I met some of the nicest people I'd ever met in these rooms. And there was, it was real emotional for them and for me. We had a great time that night. So here's the deal. All of this was just rhetoric until my oldest daughter finally got sober. And now she's in the same rooms. And now this crusty old guy is hypersensitive to what she's hearing and what she's not hearing. And some of you have family members, and you know exactly what it is that I'm talking about like that. Which one of those groups would you rather your daughter go to? The real fancy schmancy group where they ignored me completely, or that place in Fort Worth? Guys, at the end of all this deal like this, kindness is king. Kindness is everything. If we could just simply get people to understand that this is not, people go, well, they'll come back. The dope and stuff will bring them back. I keep going, no, statistically, they won't come back. Statistically, they'll die. And this is the stuff that scares the spit out of me like that. I don't want to be, I need to crawl down off that soapbox. I'm sorry. I'll be nice. I want everybody to understand that we're in a unique position to paint a picture of what recovery actually looks like in a way that other people understand. I love the fact that I'm sober. I love the fact that I've not been in any slimy dope houses, or I've been to any booze places for 36 years. I love that fact. But I am far more grateful that a crusty old guy from Central Texas had the ability to change the course of someone's life simply because I was willing to be kind and willing to take the time to learn the program, learn the steps so that I could teach the steps, because you can't teach what you don't know. I got to be able to teach it. And once I could get like this, all I could see around me were smiling faces and miracle after miracle after miracle. I was in a Bible study one time not too long ago with some friends of mine down in Florida, and it's a Zoom Bible study. And these guys, I said something about a miracle, and this guy said, whoa, wait. You think you've actually seen a miracle? And I busted out laughing like this. And he said, what's so funny like that? I said, buddy, I couldn't count how many miracles I've seen. Every time I open my eyes and I look at a screen on Zoomies like this, I see a sea of people that statistically should be dead, but they're not. And this is pretty special. Pretty special. All right. I love you guys. I better shut up right there. Thank you so much for letting me come, buddy. Purdy, appreciate you, bud.